the automatic doors haven't been invented yet. So when the glass door swings open at the A&P on a Tuesday morning in 1958, it's a hand that pushes it and a small bell that announces the arrival. Inside, the air smells like sawdust and fresh bread, like coffee beans and open bins, like the faint sweetness of ripe bananas stacked in a pyramid near the window. A woman in a belted cotton dress steadies a wire cart with a squeaky front wheel. Her heels click against the checkerboard floor tile. Somewhere near the meat counter, a butcher in a white apron sharpens his knife against a steel rod, and the sound rings out clean and rhythmic, almost musical. Fluorescent tube lights hum overhead, still a novelty to some shoppers, still something people mention to their neighbors. Have you seen the new lighting down at the store? This is not a farmer's market. It is not a corner grocer weighing beans on a brass scale. This is something newer, something still settling into American life. This is the supermarket. And in 1958, it is quietly rewriting the rules of how a family eats, how a mother spends her Tuesday, and how a country begins to think about food itself.
By 1958, the supermarket was no longer a novelty. It was becoming the center of American domestic life. The idea itself was not brand new. The first true supermarket, King Cullen, opened in Jamaica, Queens in 1930, offering thousands of products under one roof with separate departments for produce, meats, dairy, and baked goods. But it took nearly 3 decades, a depression, and a world war for that idea to fully take root across the country. Several forces converged to make 1958 feel different from the years before it. Refrigeration had improved, automobile ownership had climbed, and Americans, for the first time in generations, had a little more money and a little more room to breathe. The corner grocer, with his personal touch and his credit book under the counter, was slowly being replaced by something bigger, brighter, and colder. Literally, thanks to refrigerated cases that hummed along entire walls of these new stores. This was also a decade shaped by the automobile and the suburb. Families were moving out of city apartments and into ranch homes with driveways and station wagons parked in front. A weekly trip to the supermarket, often loaded into the trunk of that station wagon, became a new kind of ritual, one built around convenience, abundance, and a certain quiet optimism about the future. But behind the cheerful fluorescent lights and the neatly stacked cans, something more complicated was happening. Grocery shopping in 1958 sat at a crossroads between the old world and the new one. And to understand it fully, we have to step inside.
Walk into that A&P in 1958, and the first thing you'd reach for is a cart. Not a basket carried on your arm, the way your mother might have shopped, but a wire cart on wheels, something that let you buy more than you could carry. The modern telescoping cart, the kind that nests neatly inside another cart at the front of the store, was developed by Orla E. Watson of Kansas City in 1946, designed so that each additional parked cart required only about 1/5 as much space as an ordinary cart. By 1958, these carts were everywhere, and they had changed shopping in a subtle but powerful way. When you carry a basket, your arm tells you when to stop. When you push a cart, there is no such limit. Historians of retail have noted that the cart itself encouraged bigger purchases, more impulse buys, more of everything. And the stores were built to take advantage of that. Long aisles, wide sweeping layouts. Some supermarkets even leaned into showmanship. Publix, for instance, had been nicknamed the Taj Mahal of supermarkets for its spacious aisles. And around 1957, the chain famously drove a shopper around one of its stores in a car, just to demonstrate how much room there was. It sounds almost absurd today, but it captures something true about the era. Space itself, the sheer square footage of a supermarket, was something to be proud of, something worth showing off. Not long before 1958, buying meat meant standing at a counter and asking the butcher directly for what you wanted. He would wrap it in white paper, tie it with string, and hand it over the counter with a nod. But this was changing fast. An ambitious new Vons supermarket in Los Angeles had become home to some of the country's earliest self-service meat, deli, and produce departments as early as 1948, spurred by wider availability of prepackaged perishables. By the late 1950s, this self-service model had spread widely. Meat now arrived pre-cut, weighed, and wrapped in cellophane, sitting in long refrigerated cases where a shopper could simply reach in and choose. The The butcher was still there, often visible through a window behind the counter, still respected, still a familiar face. But the direct, personal exchange of the older grocery store was fading. Bacon had already become the first vacuum-packaged food widely available in supermarkets back in 1947, and by 1958, packaged and pre-portioned foods were simply expected. Housewives, and the language of the era did call them that without irony, could now walk the length of a store without asking anyone for help. Independence, at least in the aisles, had arrived. If you looked into a shopping cart in 1958, you would see a strange and telling mix of old and new. There would be flour in a cotton sack, the kind that some families still repurposed into dish towels or even children's clothing, a habit left over from leaner years. There would be canned vegetables, stacked neatly, a reminder of how deeply canning had shaped the American pantry since the war. And increasingly, tucked in among the traditional staples, there would be something new. A frozen dinner in an aluminum tray, the kind meant to be heated and eaten in front of the television. Even produce was changing.
A new strawberry cultivar developed by crossing two university varieties became commercially available in 1958. One bred specifically to withstand shipping and to keep fruiting into early fall, helping the strawberry become a genuine grocery store staple rather than a rare seasonal treat. It's a small detail, but it says something large. Food itself was being engineered, quietly, to survive the journey from farm to supermarket shelf, to look appealing under fluorescent light, to sit patiently in a bin until someone chose it. At the checkout counter, the ritual was almost entirely different from what we know today. There were no barcodes. The price scanner was still 16 years away. Every item passed through the cashier's hands, and she, it was almost always a she, read the price stamped or stickered onto the can or box and rang it up by hand on a mechanical register that gave a satisfying metallic chime with every entry. Payment, too, told its own story. The 1950s and 1960s were the true heyday of the trading stamp, when large numbers of Americans received stamps with their groceries and saved them in books to redeem for household goods. A cashier might hand over your change along with a strip of S&H green stamps, and children often had the job of licking those stamps and pasting them carefully into a collector's book, dreaming of the toaster or the lamp waiting for them in the catalog. Checks were common, and cash was still king for most families. Credit, as we understand it today, was only just beginning to enter the picture. In fact, checks made up more than half of all grocery purchases until the first American Express cards debuted in 1958, the very same year our story is set, and the first debit cards were issued that same year by a California bank. Few shoppers standing in line that autumn had any idea they were witnessing the earliest seeds of a plastic card economy that would eventually replace the checkbook entirely. For most families, the supermarket trip was a weekly event, not a daily one, and that in itself marked a real shift from earlier generations. Grandparents might remember walking to a corner store nearly every day, buying just enough bread and milk for that evening's meal because there was no refrigerator large enough and no car to haul a week's worth of groceries home. But by 1958, most American homes had a refrigerator, many had a freezer compartment, and many families had a car parked outside. That car mattered enormously. It meant a mother could drive to a supermarket on the edge of town, load the trunk with 2 weeks of canned goods, cereal, milk, and frozen vegetables, and not think about the store again until the following Saturday. It changed meal planning. It changed the rhythm of the entire household. Sunday dinner, weekday lunches, school snacks, all of it could now be planned in advance, purchased in bulk, and stored away in a way that simply hadn't been possible for most Americans a generation earlier. There is something worth pausing on here, something easy to overlook. The self-service supermarket asked something new of the American shopper: trust. Trust that the pre-packaged meat was fresh, even though you couldn't ask the butcher directly. Trust that the price on the can was fair, even without a personal relationship with the man behind the counter.
Trust in the store itself, in its brand, in its national reputation, rather than in the individual grocer down the street who had known your family for years.
This wasn't unique to grocery shopping. It mirrored something happening across American life in the 1950s, as small personal institutions gave way to larger, more standardized ones. But it played out especially vividly in the supermarket aisle, where abundance and anonymity arrived together, hand in hand. Some historians point out that not every American experienced this abundance equally, and that supermarket growth in the 1950s followed the same patterns as suburban growth itself. often bypassing city neighborhoods and communities that didn't have easy access to a car. It's a detail worth holding on to, because it reminds us that the story of 1958 grocery shopping, warm and nostalgic as it is, wasn't the same story for every American family. For many, the corner store remained the only practical option for years to come. Stand for a moment longer in that A&P, in the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, and imagine the cart being wheeled out toward the parking lot. The trunk opens. The paper bags, brown and sturdy, are loaded in one by one. Somewhere in one of those bags is a strip of green stamps, carefully tucked into a purse, waiting to be pasted into a book later that evening. It is easy, looking back, to smile at the details. The mechanical registers, the strawberries bred for shipping, the American Express card that almost nobody understood yet. But underneath all of it was something quietly profound. A generation of Americans was learning to trust a bigger, more impersonal system to feed their families, and in exchange, they were gaining something real: more time, more variety, more room to plan ahead. Today, we walk into supermarkets so vast and so automated that 1958 would seem almost quaint by comparison. Self-checkout has replaced the cashier's careful hand-wringing. Barcodes have replaced stamped prices. And yet, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear an echo of that era in every cart that rolls down every aisle in America. A small, wheeled reminder of a generation that first learned to shop this way and who taught the rest of us, without ever quite meaning to, how to do it too.